Declaration. I hereby declare that this thesis is a bona fide record. That means it's the real deal, right? It's a good, correct record of research work done by Ma Epamukin, and that no part of the thesis has been presented earlier for the award of any degree, diploma or similar title of any other university. 20 October 2000. Certificate. This is to certify that the thesis, entitled The History of the Assyrian Church of the East in the 20th Century, with special reference to the Syriac literature in Kerala, is a record of studies and research carried out by him. Okay, maybe that's a repeat of the other page. Acknowledgements. His Holiness Ma Kanania Dinka IV, Catholicus Patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East, who encouraged him in many ways to do this research and so forth. These are different spellings of all the names. You got Josip, Joseph, Johanan, John. Okay. He's got Thomas down here somewhere. Can't see it. Yeah. Mary, Mariam, or Mariam, and so forth. Shamun, Simon, Shimon, Shamun. Contents page. Title page in Syriac, declaration, certificate, acknowledgements, different spellings. Chapter 1, Introduction. Chapter 2, History of the Assyrian Church of the East since the time of King Abgar Ukama in the 1st century until the end of the 19th century. Yeah, apparently he was a sick man, heard about Christ, so he wrote a letter to him, apparently. Some say, oh, nah, it's fake or something like that. You know, it's not real, blah, blah, blah. But apparently he was sick and he wanted healing, and he knew that Christ, heard about that Christ was going around doing miracles and healing people. So he wrote a letter. I think one of his Christ's disciples was actually in his kingdom, right? And he says, tell him to come and heal me, and he can live here in peace with us. There's plenty of room here. Won't be any problems for him. But apparently he wrote back. The letter was given through one of his disciples, probably had died or something like that. And he says, unfortunately I can't come because I'm about my father's business. And he knew his time was coming, that he'd be, have to suffer, crucified, die, be born, be resurrected, etc. Right? All that sort of stuff, because that was his destiny. So he says, I can't make it, but I've seen one of my disciples and he'll heal you. Something like that, right? Okay. And apparently somebody took the cloth that covered his face in the tomb, possibly his whole entire body, but it specifically talks about the cloth that covered his face, and it made an imprint of his face in this cloth. So they took it to this king, who kept it for a long time until they were invaded or something, and the Romans pinched it and took it to Italy, or to Rome, and it became the Shroud of Turin. Right. Okay. It disappeared and it ended up there, apparently. Introduction, the early period, the Middle Ages, so forth. Period of decline, period of uncertainty, period of sufferings. Chapter 5, Ecumenical Era, 1976 to 2000. Chapter 7, Appendices, Conclusions, Biography by the books by the author, Assyrian Churches, 600 AD, etc., etc. All these maps by the look of it. Photos of prelates, late prelates, present prelates, about the author. Back cover, inside, back cover. Okay, Introduction. Chapter 1, Introduction. Previous research. The history of the Assyrian Church of the East in the 20th century has not been written so far. At the same time, students of the church history will agree that the 20th century is a very eventful period in the history of this much persecuted church. Professor John Joseph's book, The Nestorians and Their Muslim Neighbours, Princeton University Press, 1961, deals with this topic in part 2, the 20th century. Although that is a very useful study, his 20th century ends before the end of the first half of the 20th century. Much water has flown under the rivers Euphrates and Tigris since then. The war between Iraq and Iran from 1980 to 1988 has increased the number of refugees from both countries. Iraq's occupation of Kuwait on 2nd August 1990 and the American bombing of Baghdad and suburbs in January 1991 have affected adversely the members of the Assyrian Church of the East. We have a friend who works at a local supermarket. He's a security guard, but he's just like totally not interested in this, even though he was born in Iran. Okay? He's very anti-religious, right? Not atheist, but he's just not interested in it. Right? Okay, Iraq's occupation of Kuwait on 2nd August 1990 and the American bombing of Baghdad and suburbs in January 1991 have affected adversely the members of the Assyrian Church of the East. While Dr. John Joseph's doctoral dissertation deals with the political scenario of the Assyrian people, a book by an Englishman, Dr. J.F. Coakley, now working in Harvard, or at that present time, Harvard, USA, the Church of the East and the Church of England, deals with the ecclesiastical aspects of this church. Some of his conclusions throw light on the contemporary history of the Church of the East. Professor Joseph Yaqub, PhD, who has written a comprehensive history of the Assyrian Church, is an Assyrian born in Hasaka, Syria, and grew up in Beirut. He moved to Lyon, France in 1969 to pursue doctoral studies. Dr. Joseph Yaqub teaches political sciences at the Catholic University of Lyon. Most of his writings are in the French language. The book, The Assyrian Question, published in England, is a lecture presented by Professor Joseph Yaqub on August 4, 1985 at the Assyrian Association in Chicago, USA. And there's heaps more information there. Another author who has written on the Assyrian Church and Chaldean Church is Father Jean-Maurice Fouillet. Unfortunately, scholarly works penned by this author are not available in English. Yeah, that seems to be the problem. Even the Assyrian, a lot of the Assyrian texts and the audio, videos, etc. are in Assyrian. Nobody bothers to do one in English. I've asked them, and a lot of them just can't be bothered, right? Okay, maybe too much work or something like that. The geographical area covered in the present dissertation is the whole world, wherever the Assyrian congregations are found today, from New Zealand. Yeah, there's one here, and got hold of a person on Facebook, trying to get banners. Just got a t-shirt made of the wing disc icon, etc. You see that in one of our videos real soon. Okay, trying to get hold of this Assyrian lady that does artwork, or the ancient reliefs, you know, the kings and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, just she hasn't got hold of us yet. Yeah, because their church is so far away. It's like, yeah, we have to travel a couple of hours by train to get there. Get there by 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday or something. Yeah, because maybe the service is over at 10 and we'll be locked outside. Yeah, it's so far. The other one that we rang up about said, oh, you have to get permission to attend our meetings by email. We're like, what the hell is that, you know? So there's a few around. The writer of this dissertation has first-hand knowledge of the happenings in this church during the past 4 decades. During the official meetings in the church and participation in official and non-official ecumenical dialogues, the present writer has gathered documents reliable enough to enable him to present a comprehensive history of this church during the period 1900 to 2000. A fairly strict chronological order is followed in writing the history of the much persecuted church here for like 18th centuries, 2000 years, by the Roman Catholic Church, Western churches, Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, the Kurds, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and lots more, right? A fairly strict chronological order is followed in writing the history of this much persecuted church. 2 world wars have devastated this community and displaced the Assyrians from their homeland in Turkey. At the end of the First World War in 1918, the Assyrians fled from their homeland in Turkey. Yeah, well, the British done a deal with them, says join the war, you know, fight with us, for us, whatever, and we'll get your homeland back. And they did a dirty renege and didn't deliver. Okay, so these people fled from their homeland in Turkey. At a later stage, many Assyrians left their homes in northern Iraq and settled down near Baghdad, and a lot went to America. 2 patriarchs, namely Ma Binyamin Shamun and Ma Ishai Shamun, that we were talking about, who was assassinated, uncle and nephew, were shot dead in entirely different circumstances. At present, the hereditary succession followed in the patriarchal family has ended. The church has decided not to consecrate bishops for tribes. Now, bishops and metropolitans are consecrated for geographical areas such as cities and countries. The history of the Assyrian church in the 20th century is divided into the following 4 periods for the purpose of this dissertation. And there it is there. Ma Ishai Shamun, from his exile from Iraq to his death in 1933. He was born like 1933 to 1975. Okay, and these other ones. Ma Kenania Dinka 4 to the present day, 1976 to 2000, when this was published. Not too sure who's the latest patriarch present in this time and age. Okay, objectives. This is a scientific search into the documents as well as oral evidence. The secondary sources that also have been used, both secular and religious history, has been discussed. It is impossible to separate religion and race in the case of the Assyrians. We have asked some Assyrians online if they could expand on the history, and a lot of them say we hate our history, and they're like quite amazed that someone from down under near Antarctica has good pronunciation of their wording, of their language, and has all this information. It's like they'll ask you, were we Assyrian? Right? No, we just have a great mentor, Victor Ian Alexander, right? And we've read his translation and into English of these original manuscripts, etc., etc., and that's basically us in a nutshell. Oh, and plus when his site was up, we really, really examined it more than anyone else, almost to a point of fanaticism. Okay, much has been said about the Assyrian tragedy of the First World War as well as that of the massacre in 1933. This work is a probe into the reasons of these tragic events. As the Assyrian Church of the East is involved in ecumenical discussions today, this study will help us to understand the actual situations of these Christians. They were shifted from their traditional homes to face challenges of the modern world. Importance of this research. According to Dr. Sebastian Brock of Oxford, England, there is no such study available at present. Dr. Brock asked the present writer to give a lecture on this topic at the Oriental Institute, Oxford, in May 1994. He encouraged the present writer to write a book on this topic, which could be useful for students of church history. Thank goodness for that. And so forth. Okay, this present writer, who had studied Syriac language for liturgical purpose for more than 4 decades and had been part of and parcel of the life and history of this church since his ordination as deacon on 25th June 1961, took up this challenge to fill up this gap. Details of procedure. The writer of this dissertation wrote a BD, a bachelor's degree thesis, on Nestorius when he was 20 years old. Later in 1966 he wrote a master's thesis and also a doctorate thesis, D.Th, in 1976. Several papers on this topic were written even after obtaining a doctorate. So this is the requirements he had to do in order to get those doctorates, right? The PhD. This study is objective. The previous experience in historical research and methodology has helped the present writer to cast his net wider and to bring to light all aspects of the history of this church and publications in Syriac and English. Not only the library of the St. Ephraim Ecumenical Research Institute, Kottayam, and the Metropolitan Palace Library in Chkur, which it goes on and on, right? Bibliography. Syriac books and manuscripts were consulted in English and Malayalam. Records were scrutinized in order to leave for posterity an accurate account of the history of this church during 1900 to 2000 AD. Yeah, there was another one, the Malayalam, and the only English it had was given by from the hands of the original disciple St. Thomas, and all the rest was in Malayalam, or some language like that. Okay. As far as the future Christian community is concerned, 2000 AD would mark the 204 years of settling this Christian community from the neighbourhood of Cheshire. Letters between the prelates, judgments of the civil courts, pamphlets and such secondary sources are essential for telling the story as objectively as possible. And more information. Name of the church. The Church of the East is known in history by various names. The name the Assyrian Church is known in many circles. As the majority of the Church of the East members are Assyrian ethnically, this name is preferred. At the same time, this church is known by the name the Nestorian Church in many books authored by Catholic as well as Protestant writers. Protestant writers. Should be Protestant writers, shouldn't it? It is a nickname because when most of the churches condemned Nestorius, the Church of the East refused to condemn Nestorius, as it was felt that Nestorius did not teach any heretical ideas in his refusal to call the Blessed Virgin Mary Mother of God or Theotokos. Now, the Church of the East does not normally use the name the Nestorian Church, lest it should create the wrong notion among outsiders that it was Nestorius who founded this ancient church, because he had a debate with the Roman Catholic Cyril. Cyril really wanted to be the bishop of all bishops, but he realised that Nestorius would be that bishop of all bishops. So he got all jealous and he started telling lies. Right? And this Church of the East, this Assyrian Church of the East, spoke up and said, in regards to Nestorius's statement that the Christ, the Messiah, Yeshua Mashiach, the Messiah, was of two natures, was of two substances. This is known as hypostasis, that he was both God, or divine, and man. Okay? So, Cyril said, this guy Nestorius is a heretic, and because this particular church, the Apostolic Church of the East, said, well, he's right, we've known that and used that, possibly in their liturgy, etc., for 2,000 years, or 1,000 years before that one. So they were labelled heretics, and they were called Nestorians, erroneously called Nestorians, because of that statement, right? These Roman Catholics or whatever, they were the Nestorians, right? And there is a discussion between a patriarch, where this guy kept calling him a Nestorian, yeah? And he says, if you keep calling us that, continue to call us Nestorians, we'll have to go to war. Okay, so now the Church of the East does not normally use the name of the Nestorian Church, lest it should create the wrong notion among outsiders that it was Nestorius who founded this ancient church, which he didn't. They state he didn't. They just happen to agree with that hypostasis statement. The present writer has used this name in many of his books, like the Nestorian Fathers, Nestorian Missions, Nestorian Theology. It's a name, it's basically labelled, they're labelled by, it's stuck over the centuries, so they just go with it, right? As a matter of fact, he is of the opinion that the church should not feel guilty of using that name, for the name Nestorian is not without honour in history. The great expansion to China, Japan, Tibet, Sri Lanka, etc. in the history of the church is recorded in that name. The Church of the East in Thrissur is locally known as the Chaldean Syrian Church, but outside India, the name Chaldean refers to the branch of the Church of the East that accepted the supremacy of the Pope of Rome. So they get into the old Mary, this fourth in the Godhead stuff, right? Mary the Virgin, all this sort of stuff. In the 19th century, two metropolitans, namely Mar Thoma Rokos and Mar Elia Yohanan Melas, served this church. They were consecrated and sent to Thrissur by Patriarch Mar Joseph Aldo, who was under the Roman jurisdiction. He sent these metropolitans against the wishes of Rome. Therefore, they worked in Thrissur without the permission of the Pope. The representatives of Vatican worked against both these metropolitans and saw that they were ordered back to Babylon. Right? The name Babel is used because the patriarchs were known as the patriarchs of Babel or Babylon. Hint, hint, hint. Look in Revelations, book of Revelations. Who is the of Babylon? The Roman Catholic Church. Okay? So all these people out there, we try to tell them, make them realise all these modern day Bibles you've got, these Americanized Bible versions translated in English, are coming from one source, the Roman Catholic Church. The scribes like Martin Luther, etc., translated the Hebrew text, the Hebrew texts that were translated into the Greek, into the from the Old Germanic into Latin, and then King James Version was basically the Puritan Bible, or better version of it for the Church of England, for the people, right? Okay, he wanted a new translation, and it was authorised to be read only in the churches of England. So if you've got like Americans, etc., saying, the King James only readers, all this sort of stuff, and it's authorized to be read in all the churches. Baloney. Okay, go check out the history of the KJV 1611, etc. Right, do the personal research, and you'll find that's true. It's probably even in the dedication. She's we the translators dedicate this to the then Prince James, etc., etc. It's in those really, really old versions. It's usually like up in the cover. There's usually that dedication, declaration by those translators in there. But the modern day ones don't have it. So the Roman Catholics couldn't mess with it until about 2000, right? And all those Bibles, you have to look at the Brian video like we always suggest, right? Probably put it at the end of this video again, so you can see it. And he says it's all coming from the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, Wycliffe, Tinsdale, whoever you can, all these church fathers or whatever, it's all coming from them. They're all Roman Catholics, right? Just Martin Luther and others decided to protest. They wanted to reform, they wanted to change because they saw some things that they didn't like about the Mother Church, but they still remained good Catholics, right? Good Catholic boys. The Protestants were just protesters. They're reformists. They're protesters of that Catholic Church against that Catholic Church. So they were still Roman Catholics. Okay. Some broke away and formed their own Protestant church, right? But they still cling to the old garb or the dress, purple sashes, all that sort of stuff, like Anglican Church, priests, pastors, whatever. And they still do those. They follow those Roman Catholic doctrines, dogmas, right? And do their sacraments, their rituals. Okay, so they're still attached to their Mother Church. Okay, through those practices. Okay, it's when you're completely separated from them. That's when you're the Protestant, right? But they're all these modern day churches that they suck up, because they need the money for medical hospitals, whatever they want, right? Yeah, like the Seventh Day Adventists for years and years, the church, they were against it, saying they're of the Revelations, the false church, all this sort of stuff. But apparently one of their top guys went because they really needed money for their hospitals, whatever, right? Need some finance. So he was apparently heard in the aisle or something, or a seat, saying, "Oh, look, there's His Holiness the Pope," and all this sort of stuff. And he kissed up to him and got that funding. Yeah, so okay, so yeah, that's the information there. Okay, so that's who they are. The name Babel is used because the patriarchs were known as the patriarchs of Babel or Babylon. Okay? That false church of Babylon. Chapter 2. Introduction. This period from the 1st century to the end of the 19th century is treated below in an attempt to understand this church before we plunge into the detailed history of the Church of the East in the 20th century. We are not looking into the details of the early centuries, but making only a cursory glance at the vicissitudes of history that this ancient church went through. All the claims of being heretics, the persecution and the martyrdoms, all the hate from different people throughout history. Okay, as it has shrunk into a small church, many Christians have the wrong notion that it was a small denomination. Many ask this author the question: when did your church come into being? Was it with Nestorius or later? Many Christians, unfortunately, in spite of the ecumenical context of today, have no idea of this church or its admirable historic past. Yeah, they were persecuted for 2,000 years or 18 centuries, whatever they say, right? By all these different peoples, from Genghis Khan to ISIS, etc. Even the Kurds. They endured a lot and they stuck with their belief, their manuscripts, their faith, etc. Right? No matter how hard it became, they kept at it. So that's why Christ says, to the Pharisees, etc. This generation will rise and be judged, or the men from Nineveh, the Asherite, right? They will rise and judge that generation. Yeah, that's what he was talking about. This is Syrians, the Asherite, the Ninevites, right? Because when Jonah went there, the king heard all they had to say, and he believed them, and the one true God, except the one true God. He converted, repented, all that sort of stuff. Repented, confessed, repented, converted, whatever, got baptized, whatever. But he told all his people, look, get rid of all those Ashtaroth idols, all those idols, smash them up, whatever, those maypoles, and we're turning to the one true God of this guy, Jonah, right? Because he went there to tell them, warn them of the wrath of God was coming upon them. They're all going to suffer all this sort of stuff. And he sat under this palm tree in the heat, or some sort of tree, rubbing his hands, going, I can't wait. So God says to him, you got any pity for these people, etc., according to that book of Jonah, 14 or 20 or whatever. And he was in glee rubbing his hands or whatever, couldn't wait for their destruction. So God sent some sort of bug, a worm or a caterpillar or something that ate that tree, and he ended up getting a badass suntan, something like that. Okay. The early period, some Assyrians proud of their ethnic heritage know of King Nebuchadnezzar, but do not realize that King Nebuchadnezzar was not a Christian. Hence, a retelling of the story of King Agba Ukama becomes a necessity. According to the tradition of King Agba Ukama, or the Black, Tetrarch of Edessa, which some historians dismiss as mere tradition. Yeah, about that later as well. Christianity came to Edessa by the decision of Jesus Christ himself. When Agba Ukama wrote a letter to Jesus Christ, we mentioned that before, inviting him to his little kingdom to cure the illness of his son, it was his son, he was sick, right, and live comfortably in his kingdom, Jesus himself replied by a letter stating that his time was up, and so he would not be able to come to Edessa because he's about doing his father's work, right? He's going to suffer, be crucified and resurrected, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so the prophecy fulfilled, right? Was fulfilled. However, his disciples would come and heal the sickness of his son. Yeah, one would visit him and heal the sickness of his son. After the death of Jesus, his disciple Ma-Adai went to Edessa and cured the sickness of the son of King Agba Ukama, the Black, and evangelized the kingdom of Edessa. Some scholars think that it is an unhistorical legend and do not give any historical weight. They don't give it any historical weight. However, the members of the Church of the East believe in this tradition, whether one wants to call it history or tradition. Eusebius of Caesarea, he's one of those church fathers, attached to the Roman Catholic Church, probably. Or was he a Greek? Okay, in his ecclesiastical history states that he examined the archives in Alexandria, he might have went in Greek, and found out that the letter written by Jesus was genuine. And here's a footnote here, from where you can go and have a look at it. Ecclesiastical History 1:13:5. J.B. Segal thinks that the Syriac Acts of Thaddeus was perhaps the source of Abgar found in Eusebius. It was completed in 324 or 325 AD. The Acts of Thaddeus was composed probably at the end of the 3rd century. J.B. Segal, Edessa, the Blessed City, Oxford Clarendon Press, 1970, page 62, footnote 3. This discovery was made in the 4th century. Now the letter is not available and we cannot debate on the genuineness of the letter of King Agba and the reply. Maybe it deteriorated or it's been, I don't know, put in a basement in some museum or something. Okay. So they cannot debate on the genuineness of the letter of King Agba and the reply which Jesus sent. Therefore, let us rely on what Eusebius of Caesarea, the famous church historian of the 4th century, had recorded. Thus, Edessa becomes the first nation as a whole to become Christian. The Church of the East believes that it was founded by Ma-Adai and Ma-Mari. Some believe that Ma-Adai is Saint Thaddeus, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. Ma-Mari is said to be one of the 70 whom Jesus sent. Perhaps Ma-Mari was a disciple of Ma-Adai. As a modern Western scholar, Dr. W.A. Wigram is emphatic that Ma-Adai and Ma-Mari organised a church in Edessa in the 1st century itself. On the other hand, there were some doubting Thomases that did not pay much attention to the existence of Christianity in Edessa in the 1st century. There's a footnote here. Persian church is not the daughter church of Antioch. It is a daughter church of Edessa. Later, Edessa came under the Patriarch of Antioch, but the church in Persia has asserted its independence. In the Council of 315 AD in Seleucia, in the Persian church, Papa Bar Gagai did not agree with the Council of Miles. I think it looks like Miles, might be Melis or something. Bishop of Susa and Akib Allaha, Bishop of Kirkuk. Simon Bar Sabai, Archdeacon of Papa Bar Gagai, these names, was consecrated as rival to Papa. As a result, Simon Bar Sabai remained as archdeacon until the death of Papa around 326 or 327. Then Simon Bar Sabai became Kephalokos in 339 AD, so he was a patriarch. Mar Simon Bar Sabai was martyred along with hundreds of clergy during the terrible persecutions of the Persian king Sapor II, 339 to 379. In the Synod of Kephalokos Mar Isaac in 410 AD, the independence of the Persian church was evident. In the Synod of Patriarch Mar Dadisho in 424 AD, at Mar Kepba, decision was made not to appeal to Westerners. That means Edessa, not Antioch. Compared David Royal, The Persian Schism, Voice from the East, Volume 17, Number 2, May, July 1998, Chicago, paragraph 1 and 4. Okay. The episcopate of Papa Bar Gagai around 300 AD is considered the starting point of the Church of the East by some scholars. W.A. Wigram clarifies that the episcopate of Papa is a definite and important turning point in the history of the Church, though not the starting point which they're inclined to make it. Okay, so it's footnote down here. W.A. Wigram, and his reference to him, his book, whatever. Okay, and here's what's this? Okay, Seleucia Siphon near Baghdad became the headquarters of the church very soon. Edessa was a buffer city-state between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. During the imperial wars, the people of Edessa suffered heavily in the 4th century. At the time of Mar Apram, 306 to 373, as a result of the war, many Edessans became refugees, and Mar Apram, the deacon, had to take care of the orphans and the hungry people. The official website of the Assyrian Church of the East has the following information regarding the origin of the church. And there it is there, World Wide Web on the Assyrian Church of the East, www.syred.org. Where did it begin? The Church of the East developed first in what was known as the Parthian Empire, and when that empire was overthrown by the Persians in the 3rd century, it continued its development under the Persian government. This was the region lying to the east of the Roman border, stretched as far as to India. The exact location of the church's first congregations cannot be established from the historical record, but it is thought that it began its most serious development in the region of Kidab, Adiabin, in northern Mesopotamia, spreading from there in all directions throughout the empire. The Assyrian people of Upper Mesopotamia have always been an important part of the Church of the East, though historically they were only one ethnic group among many others within the Church. However, today they represent the single surviving cultural grouping. Though the Church moved far beyond its beginnings in Upper Mesopotamia, the language of that region, Syriac, remained the language of the Church, and its vocabulary with a certain amount of Greek added in was the source of its characteristic theological formulations. Okay, would that be the original ancient, very old Syriac, not this modern derivative way back then? How is it organised? The Church of the East is governed according to the apostolic model of bishops, presbyters and deacons. At the turn of the 4th century CAD, around AD 310, Papa Bar Gagai, the bishop of the capital city of the Persian Empire, and it's got heaps of more information on it. Right. Okay. At this synod, Marutha, a representative from the Roman Emperor, brought to the assembled bishops the canons and creed of the Council of Nicaea, and they were officially approved and received by the Church of the East. The church grew in Seleucia Ctesiphon, now in ruins near Baghdad. The Christians of the Persian Empire did not have to face the persecutions which the Christians in the Roman Empire suffered. Still, there were 3 major persecutions against them under the following rulers. 1. Sapor II, 339 to 379. Yezdegud 1, 380 to 420, and Bahram 5, 420 to 424. In the history of this church, the Council of Patriarch Mar Dadisho in 424 AD is an important event. The synod decided that no appeals would be made to the west. It is a declaration of the autonomy of this church. For political reasons, the Christians in the Persian Empire did not show any affinity to the people of the Roman Empire. Since the Persian emperors were Zoroastrians, the Christians of Persia wanted to declare that they were different from the Christians of the Roman Empire. Such an opportunity came with the unfortunate Christological controversy between Cyril of Alexandria Okay, in the stories of Antioch, we mentioned this before. Okay, this is it in detail. The Church of the East did not participate in any of the rival councils held under Cyril of Alexandria, later supported by the legates of Rome, or in the rival council presided over by Bishop John of Antioch, supported by Nestorius of Constantinople. The church in Persia was not involved in this controversy. However, when they later heard about it, they supported Nestorius, although John of Antioch agreed to accept the expression Theotokos, it's the Catholic Virgin Mary thing, in 433 AD, 2 years after the rival councils of Ephesus issued anathemas and counter-anathemas. The birth of Prophet Muhammad in the year 570 AD had serious repercussions for the Church of the East. Since Khadijah, the rich lady and the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, was a member of this church, it had constant contact with Islam from its inception. Khadijah consulted her cousin Waka when Muhammad had vision of Allah in his sleep. Waka said that the Rukusha, Holy Spirit, Rakudsha, Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKadosh, Holy Spirit inspired it. The Prophet tolerated Christians, so he was all cool with them, right? Patriarch Timotheus I of the 8th century had close contact with Caliph al-Mahdi. The dialogue between the Patriarch and the Caliph al-Mahdi is available in Syriac and Arabic. Alfonso Mingana, so maybe he's responsible for the Mingana text, has brought out an English translation of this dialogue. And it states here, a Malay Alam translation was published by Ma Nasai Press, Chico, 1957. In 635 AD, Alopan took Christianity to China. In 736, Mili took the gospel into Japan. It spread into many Arabian regions, Tibet and Far East countries like Indonesia and Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. You don't call an Indian a Sri Lankan, or you don't call a Sri Lankan an Indian, because they had a big battle with the Indians, and they get all upset. We found that out. In the 11th century, it outnumbered the members of all the Western churches put together. Because of the decline of the church in recent years, it is not in a position to unearth historical details of her glorious past. Nevertheless, Western scholars, whether Roman Catholic or Protestant, are doing research and writing doctoral dissertations digging deep into the glorious past of this church. Alopan brought Christianity to China in 635 AD, and so forth. In the Middle Ages, in the 13th century, when the Abbasid Empire fell, Christians thought that they would have better prospects under the Mongols. Guyuk died 1248. The grandson of Chinggis Khan had a Christian vizier, and he himself is described by Ibn al-Ibri as a true Christian. In his days, the bishop and priests had access to the places of power in the land. In 1258, Hulagu conquered Baghdad. His wife was a true Christian queen. Rabban Salma died 1317, and monk Marcos died 1318, went on in an embassy to Rome and France as the ambassadors, and so forth, of Kublai Khan at the end of the 13th century. A Syriac book was translated into English and published by James Montgomery in New York in 1927 under the title The History of Jabalaha III, Nestorian and Patriarch, and it was Vicar Bar Salma. He died around about 1317. Some of the remarks are interesting and useful for ecumenical negotiations going on today. Okay, Rabban Salma wanted to celebrate liturgy in Rome. After he celebrated the liturgy, which was attended by a large congregation curious to see how these Mongols celebrated Eucharist, they rejoined and said, "The language is different, but the rite is one." Rabban Salma, after the celebration, went to the Pope and greeted him. The Pope said to Rabban Salma, "May God receive thy offering and bless thee and pardon thy faults and sins." And Rabban Salma said, "With the pardon of my faults and sins which I have received from thee, O Father, I desire of thy fatherliness, O Holy Father, that I may receive the communion from thy hands, so that I may have complete forgiveness." And he said, "It shall be so." This was an important ecumenical event. Anyhow, the monk blessed by the Pope became Patriarch of the Church of the East by the name Jabalaha III in 1289 AD. This patriarch died in 1318 AD and was succeeded by Ma Timotheus 2. During his time there was a synod of the Universal Church of the East. Afterwards there is no recorded history of any synod of the church until the second half of the 20th century. Very little is recorded about the history of the period after Patriarch Mar Timotheus II, and so forth. Around 1400 AD, terrific persecutions fell on this church. Tamerlane was a fanatic. His ambition was to conquer the whole world. After Tamerlane, the Assyrian church never had peaceful days. Christianity disappeared from the Arabian Peninsula. The glorious days are over. The Assyrians had to settle down in the mountains of Hakkari in Turkey. Some Assyrians settled down in the Azerbaijan area. The Ottoman Empire established itself in the plain of Mosul in 1516. 17, and by a treaty of 1555 with the Safavid state of Persia, acquired Kurdistan. The same treaty annexed Azerbaijan by Persia. A large number of Assyrian Christians settled around Urmia. In 1562 there were at least 4 metropolitan sees in Urmia area. Okay. In the Council of Florence, 1438 to 1445, during the pontificate of Pope Eugene IV, all the Nestorians of Cyprus joined the Catholic Church. Bishop Mar Timotheus of the Diocese of Cyprus of the Church of the East signed a document of unity with Rome in August 1445 AD. These Christians were Mesopotamian immigrants. In his profession of faith, the Metropolitan describes himself as Archbishop of Tarsus for the Chaldeans and Bishop of those of them who are in Cyprus. Quoted from the paper presented by Friar Sahar Jamo in the Joint Committee, etc., etc. They had later adopted the Latin Rite. The split under John Sulaka, 1553. The year 1552 witnessed what was a very sad event in the history of the Assyrian Church of the East. When Patriarch Shamun Bar Mama died in 1551, his nephew Shamun Seven Denha was consecrated and so forth. Okay. When did they split? Okay. Looking for when they split. Patriarch Mar Abdisho IV decided to move his headquarters from Amida to Sirte to avoid conflict with the Assyrians, who were blamed for the murder of Sulaka. Actually, the Turks in Diyarbakir were responsible for killing Sulaka. Yeah, they got the blame for it though. Okay, there Mar Abdisho consecrated not less than 14 archbishops and bishops. Before the Patriarch died at Sirte in 1567, blah blah blah. Okay. Two Maltese Dominicans, namely Bishop Ambrose Buttigieg and Friar Antonius Sahara, who were sent by Pope Julius III to help Patriarch Sulaka, had accompanied the Chaldean metropolitans to India, but the Portuguese authorities did not cooperate with the plan of the Catholic Chaldean Patriarch to control the Indian Church. Okay, and the history of the Chaldean bishops. The Assyrian Church of the East continued under the hereditary patriarchs of Mar Shamun family. The Patriarchate of Mar Yusuf, the third line, blah blah blah. Okay, this Patriarch Yohan Hormuz dies in Baghdad 1838. Still looking for when they split. The same writer appears somewhere. Same writer remarks that many of the Nestorian parishes joined the Catholic faith during the administration of Patriarch Aldo. In 1853 he codified the Chaldean canon law in the Latin form at the Council of Rabban Hormuzd. This was done under the influence of the apostolic delegate Planchet, who was a Jesuit. This patriarch was also was always opposed to the Congregation of the Propagation of Faith. By 1860 it was open defiance. In 1861, against the advice of Rome, Patriarch St. Martoma Rokos, metropolitan to India. This Chaldean bishop was well received in Tishur, but in 1862 he was forced to return to Mesopotamia. Rome used its influence in India to push Rokos out of Kerala, and so forth. They had some problems with this Johann Humes by the sound of it. According to the list, the following persons who preceded Patriarch Mar Elias Shimon Isha Yaba, who died in 1804 AD, are put under the caption Returning Historians. He omits the names of the successors in the historian line. Still trying to look for when they split from that Roman Catholic Church. Here's a synod, the Emperor, which is the hidden agenda of converting the native Christians into another brand of Christians was a new phenomenon. This is a time when Martin Luther had not nailed the 95 theses to the door of the castle church at Wittenberg, Germany, where his tomb is situated. But after 1517 AD, the Reformation under Martin Luther took away many thousands of Christians from under the authority of the Pope. The revolt, led by King Henry VIII, also separated the Christians in England from obedience to the Pope.